I'm here today with Rael Rodning. She's our principal architect for our AIOps organization. Thanks for joining me today, Rael.
I'm super glad to be here.
Well, I asked you here today because I wanted to talk to you about AIOps and provide maybe a better clarity for organizations and for our team as well about what we mean by AIOps. So maybe if you could start by just giving me a quick definition of how you see AIOps as a practice.
So AIOps, in my mind, as a practice, is leveraging AI and applying it to infrastructure, network, and even security operations so that you can optimize and modernize your operations.
So in addition to network and security that you mentioned, does AIOps also cover things like cloud and infrastructure as code and
Absolutely.
sort of the broader spectrum of an IT operation?
It does. It covers the entire IT operation, or the way an organization puts it all together. So you're going to look at DevOps, you'll look at security. If you're running a hybrid cloud or multi-cloud, it impacts all of that because the way that you optimize your operations is leveraging those AI tools in order to make things more efficient.
Well, that makes sense. And one of the things that we've found as we talk to organizations more and more about AI is that one of the central challenges with AI in general in the business is data. Is that also true in the IT ops or AI ops organization space?
Actually, data, in my opinion, is the most critical part of AI ops. If your data isn't ready, you can't really effectively apply anything else. That means you lack observability, which means if you don't have good observability, you're unable to automate. If you can't automate, then you can't validate against your desired outcomes. And if you can't validate against your desired outcomes and then make adjustments and do assessment, you can't complete that cycle. So good data is absolutely key.
So you mentioned a really good point for me, and I always struggle with this personally. You've got data, and then you've got the visibility. I need data to have good visibility, but I also need visibility to have good data. How does a company sort of wrestle with that balance of trying to figure out the right ability? What data do I need? What data do I maybe want to filter? How do I get that data out of my IT environment?
The biggest piece with data is doing a data assessment, whether you have a company do that or whether you do it internally. But that involves actually mapping out all of your sources of data. Sometimes that seems really overwhelming,
Sure.
But if you don't map that out, you don't understand what you have. Once you understand what you have, you then need to take that data and you need to start to look at where it's duplicated, because you need to remove all that duplicate data or noise, because if you try to do any kind of assessment and you have multiple pieces of the same data, you're going to get bad information about frequency, or you're going to start making decisions based on bad data. So then you have to look at the quality of the data, and quality is nebulous, but it covers things like, are you naming things consistently? Are you using all uppercase, all lowercase, or are you using camel case? And so you need to look at that. You need to look at making sure that it's not siloed, which happens in a lot of modern organizations. You get security data in one place, you get infrastructure operational data in another. And so you also need to look at how it's able to be integrated and how you can aggregate all of that and put it into a place and then get rid of all the noise so that you've got really good signals that are really clear.
Well, there's a couple things there that I'd love to dive into a little bit more. One of the things that you mentioned was there's data coming from a variety of sources that needs to be normalized. To me, that's sort of a heritage of how we've always run our IT operations, that we've got a network team, we've got a security team, we've got a storage team, I've got a compute team that's generating all of this data that tells me a lot about what's going on in the environment. And then over here, usually over here, I've got this DevOps team or cloud team that's running my cloud, and they've got all the data and telemetry about their cloud that we then have to figure out how to aggregate and pull together. And is that what you're really pointing towards, is how do I normalize all those from those different environments?
It's about bringing it all together, because the network people might be looking at all of their traffic logs and they're looking for performance stuff. Those same logs may be shipped over to a security tool, and the security team is looking at those exact same logs for security events, and they've got different identifiers. Well, when you start to aggregate that data, one of the things you have to think about is the fact that you've duplicated the data to two different groups. And so now as you bring that together, you've got to eliminate the duplicates. But then the other thing you have to do when you're looking at and bringing your data together is understand who your consumers are, because the fact that you're aggregating it doesn't change that network and security need the same data, but they need a different view of it. So we're back to observability or visibility. You've got to be able to make sure that each of the constituents gets the right visibility, because then now to move in the what I think of as the AIOps cycle is when you start to automate, security is going to want to automate something very different than the networking team is going to want to automate. And so
yeah, and I actually wanted to go there next. You talked about the different stakeholders or consumers of this data. To me, one of the key stakeholders of that data is the automation process. That automation process needs to be able to have the right fidelity of data and the right detail of data in order to be able to do the kinds of things that are virtuous for the environment. Because AIOps without automation is just visibility, right? We're not really accomplishing anything. What are the hurdles that you've seen companies face as they tried to move from I've just got a bunch of data to I've got data that I can address as a whole to I want to take that data and turn it into automated processes that actually help me reduce toil?
I think one of the biggest challenges actually is cultural. It's
Okay.
it's candidly, it's teams like the tooling that they already have. It's also a lack of trust in automation. Oftentimes, it's a fear of I'm going to lose my job. And so culturally is probably the biggest challenge to automation. The next biggest is skill set.
Sure.
And it depends how an organization wants to approach the automation. Some companies outsource it and they just say, throw it in the environment. I'm not an advocate of that, because every time you should be optimizing that automation, every time you get an outcome, you should repeat through the cycle and continue to refine. And if you've got to hire somebody to do that, that's really expensive. I'm a much bigger advocate of teaching each of your teams how to automate for what their needs are.
That's a great way to approach it, because it also addresses that people challenge you talked about. I can go from detractors to advocates by taking the time to get the people up to speed on what it is that the automation is going to do for them, for their capability that takes them to the next level.
Fingers crossed that that happens. And it does. It does take some time, though. My experience has been it can be really hard to convince people that they're not going to lose their jobs, that humans are still really critical in this whole AIOps journey. You can address 80%, that 80-20 rule. There's still going to be 20% of stuff that's just going to require that human intuition that you can't build into AI and you can't build into automations or observability. It's going to take a person to look at it, and it's just going to change and shift the job. So everybody who's in IT needs to be an automator.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what area you sit in.
Well, and you touched on something else that I want to dig into a little bit, which is if we get to a place where 80% is automated and 20% is something that humans need to look at, what's the skill set that I'm developing then? What are the skills that people are going to need when we get to the point that I've got my observability in my environment, my visibility in my environment, I'm pulling my data in, or I'm aggregating it in a federated way so I can see a comprehensive view of my environment. I've built a set of automations that allow me to address maybe most common issues, maybe even built some intelligence in there to start to predict what things might happen, and even if I wanted to get really aggressive, start to proactively make changes based off of those predictions. In that kind of environment, what are the skills that an IT operations team or an IT operations team member needs to bring to the table from your perspective?
I think they need their core skills that they've always had. I think automation is in whatever language and whatever tooling that you're using. I think, though, even in addition to that, there needs to be a level of familiarity that cuts across the entire IT stack. Doesn't matter what environment you may be highly specialized in, for example, security, but you still need to have an understanding of network and infrastructure and applications and web and data and databases, because those things are going to directly impact what you're focused on. And so you need to become more of a generalist in IT than you've ever had to be, I think, prior to the advent of AI.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting because we have a little bit of a dual narrative, right? You need a level of expertise that you need to continue to develop and grow and learn in your own area of expertise, because that's a place that AI isn't going to take much longer, or maybe even never be able to take over, is sort of that deep understanding. The other side of it is I need a broader understanding of the comprehensive environment so that I can respond to it and react to it. What's the journey look like? How does a company go from, well, I've got all these different monitoring tools, I want to be able to start to do something as a step towards my AI journey inside of my IT operations stack?
First, it needs to be done in a very progressive way. You don't need to plan to boil the ocean. And my advice to companies that are trying to do this is to try to start with what I'm going to call low-hanging fruit. Pick something that's really easy, something you're super, super familiar with, and that you do 1,000 times a day, or that your team does 1,000 times a day. You can start small, even with the data piece. And so you can go, okay, for this system or this application stack, I'm just going to get all the data clean so that I have practiced at that skill set. And then I'm going to get the visibility for that particular app stack really well. So you can do this in small incremental pieces. Then you automate around that app stack. You compare it against your outcomes and go, did I get what I wanted? Then you do your assessment, and then you repeat that whole cycle. And when you've got it optimized for one, then you broaden what you're going to reach out to.
Yeah. No, we've talked about it as a circle. I almost think of it as a spiral. You're sort of starting in the middle, and you're starting with this little bit that I can understand, and then I'm sort of growing these concentric circles so that I can really take the lessons learned and my capabilities that I've built as I address that first piece and figure out how that impacts the rest of the organization.
That's a great way to put it. It really is. That's a very great way. You start small and get bigger as you get better skilled and your team gets better skilled. Then you can take people who've learned and you can actually train the trainers.
Absolutely. The other piece of this that's super important from my perspective is being able to understand the broader direction you're going as a company. So I'm drawing these circles out, but that's going to take a period of time. It's not just going to be a 1-month project and all of a sudden I've gone from this internal circle to the external circle. It's going to be a journey of probably multiple months, multiple years even, to get to where that you need to be. One of the challenges that goes with that is making sure that as your environment changes, as your business environment and your IT environment changes, that the automation that you've built can adapt to that. And I'd be interested in sort of your reflection on what kinds of things you need to think about as you're building out that automation capabilities so that as future changes come, you can adapt to what might be required of the IT organization.
What I've done with teams in that situation, you build in a refinement cycle. I mean, you actually build that into your planning in terms of your workload, however you do workload planning. But I think that inherently is part of this AIOps, because as you do an assessment and you look at what you've done, you're going to want to tweak. And when you compare to outcomes, it's not just the outcome of the automation, but it's, are you getting what you need? And is it providing and supporting the business outcomes that the strategy of the business or where the business direction is? Because I mean, that's part of AIOps is as business is changing faster and faster, we have to have AI built into this and automatic response so that if the business decides to take a right turn halfway through the year, that you can adjust. And that's so making sure that as you build this process internally, that you have that adjustment cycle built in or cycle time built into your planning.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost it's the engine that allows you to make those changes. It's the flexibility of the IT organization is what empowers the business to be able to quickly do the things that they want to do and have it be immediately impactful in the market versus they've got a long cycle where they've got to go back and switch infrastructure and switch capabilities and whatever else to be able to do that.
I think to close the loop on that think of it, the engine, you've got to change your oil in your engine regularly.
Yeah. Yep.
It's exactly the same thing. And so you've got to adjust your automation and assess it regularly. And whatever cadence it is for a particular business, that's going to make sure that engine stays in really good shape.
Thanks, Rael. That was great. I really enjoyed our conversation. The insight that you're providing is something I'm looking forward to working with you and sharing with clients.
Me too. Thanks, Michael.